part 3. Let's do this. Now initially part 3 was just going to be me listing off songs that use the color red in a more lasting way than a verse or phrase. When we looked at the red highlights, we knew what was being conveyed because specific phrases were being visibly attributed to Blurryface. But for songs that use red the whole time, that's maybe not as immediately clear, especially for songs that predate the Blurryface album. So as I was making notes for this video, I noticed that 3.5 out of the 6 songs we're going to talk about do predate Blurryface. Because these songs are older, some of them, what I wanted to do was go back and see how lighting was used prior to that album. So this part's going to be a little more of a deep dive, and pretty fucking long. Let's take a look. So in answer to the question, how far back does red go? You can see once we hit about 2012, we see purple, 2011, purple, 2010, like purple, blue, and green. But mixed in there we have this. This is July 2011, New Albany High School, their Regional at Best CD release show. Now this is clearly red as heck, and if you watch the rest of the set, nothing else is. And based on this,
it's our CD release show, and it's outside. And we've been planning this for quite some time now. And
they poured a lot of resources into this show. There was a lot of planning. None of the songs have the same lighting. This seems like a choice made with intent. And this will not be the only time in the early days of their career when red is used symbolically, like this 2011 skit where Tyler comes out in white, Josh comes out in red, their faces are both covered, Tyler's attacked by figures in black, something happens that I don't fucking know. It's red. Point is, you can find quote-unquote on-brand lighting as far back as 2012 or 2011, but there's a certain point in sifting through dingy basement lighting where you're asking yourself, is this an artistic choice? That the question eventually shifts to, how much does this actually matter in fine detail? Though some gestures at the symbolic use of red are made early on, it really seems like for the most part, many of these choices are ruled by the circumstance of being an unsigned band. And then after that, even of being a newly signed band, like frequently being an opener. Having a low budget.
When we first started traveling, we had to share one hotel room with a bunch of dudes that we were traveling with because we were poor.
I think during that time especially, it was just like, all right, we can afford for everyone in the van to get 2 items.
Yeah.
And often playing during the daytime. Like basically, in the early years, you're just not going to be playing with all the pieces you want.
Great performers and entertainers and musicians, and it's cool. I love it.
I imagine there's a bit of production behind them as well.
Yeah. Their lighting and production's amazing, and but we're happy with our curtain.
Not to say that they don't make branding happen in other ways, but that's another video. So what I'm saying is, you could look at this mid-2014 set list with the colors written beneath each song and trace some of them back for years. So how far back does red go? As far as I can tell, pretty close to the beginning, even if it evolved over time. Anyway, a certain level of consistency will be established in 2013, just about finding its footing earlier in the year, And then in June, after Bonnaroo, the team will be joined by Daniel Sletzinger and his company Concert Investor and start to really strategize beefing up their production. And if you really wanted to read about that, you could do that here. I'm not saying you don't want to read about it. I'm just saying this video is already going to be long. But back to Ode to Sleep. Of any song of theirs that they've ever performed, Ode to Sleep is as red gets. Like sometimes you'll get some other colors mixed in there, a lot of white, sometimes purple, maybe some blue. But all in all, overwhelmingly, abidingly red. Across 8 years. If it wasn't related to the concepts that Blurryface represents, when they moved into that era, they could have changed the color. But they didn't. Between the content of the song and the way that it's presented, I get the impression that there's something foundational about Ode to Sleep that fits right in with Blurryface. Let's listen to my favorite YouTuber talk about the weight of this song for a sec.
With Ode to Sleep, Tyler introduces us to the significance of his writing. You know, he says, "Some may see a pen, I see a harpoon." And beyond that, other elements to take away from Ode to Sleep that end up being important in a lot of 21 Pilots music is Tyler's struggles with freedom, his struggles with faith. You have him asking for forgiveness. I mean, you're even introduced to fire, which ends up being a pretty big symbol in a lot of their music videos and in a lot of their lyrics as well. So, all that to say, it's pretty incredible to think that Tyler Joseph conceived a verse here this early on that would end up being on a track that is so fundamental to the storytelling behind 21 Pilots music.
So also happening in 2013 is they're going to start to incorporate visuals, and as far as Ode to Sleep goes, specifically this image. We can see pretty clearly that's a skeleton hoodie. Early in this same year, just after the release of Vessel, Brendan Regg is going to come on board and incorporate this into the sort of catalog of imagery that represents the band. So this becomes this, becomes this, becomes this. And this is a pretty central piece of imagery to the Blurryface tour, being used to demonstrate inner conflict and duality. I find it really hard to take myself seriously saying duality, but like that's what it is. You have this song that's basically this screamed prayer against his waking nightmares. He says, "Please tell them you have no plans for me," as in like, please tell them I'm not a worthy target. He says, "Some see a pen, I see a harpoon." He's using this song as a weapon. That's a pretty solid example of like inner conflict. And you can see that the skull being divided isn't just like because Homeboy had a zipper down his head, because these concept sketches for Blurryface show other expressions of that dividedness. So yeah, Ode to Sleep. Very red for a very long time. Inner conflict and other lasting themes. Skull visuals. Next up, Goner.
I'm inside out, you're underneath, and beating around the same way to the sound.
So that's Goner as it looks 2015 to 2017. Red, white, caged, and uncaged birds. But as we know, the seed of this idea came much sooner.
Somebody catch my breath. I wanna be known by you.
In fact, this is a pretty similar time frame to Ode to Sleep, and in one sense, it almost feels like a direct response.
I swear I heard demons yelling, those crazy words they were spelling. They told me I was gone. They told me I was gone.
The demons that he'll light his soul on fire to escape, what they told him is that he's gone, and in this moment, he believes them.
I'm a goner. Somebody catch my breath.
And when the second half of this song is completed for this album, the idea of who the enemy is becomes more coherent, Blurryface, but you can see that that internal war has always been there. Like, look at him screaming.
I've got two faces. Blurry's the one I'm not.
And it also comes with a plea.
Don't let me be gone. Don't let me be gone.
And then moving back to this earlier theme of freedom, we have this white bird in a red cage, which will transition to bird out of the cage, but now the bird itself is red, and ends on this flicker of like the red and white being separate. We'll also see this symbol of the cage in Ride, Holding On To You, and Leave the City. And also, Goner has really fast red and pale purple circle shapes that we'll refer back to later in this video. So, Goner. The fact that it has red light, I think the most you can say about that is it sure does. Because we're talking about red as a symbol for Blurryface, and this song is literally like, hey, here's who Blurryface is, and this is what I need. So there's not like a shitload of mystery there. So that's that on that for Goner. Before we move to the next song, I want to talk about development.
Can you give me an example of something that appeared on Blurryface that you couldn't have done before, couldn't have done on Vessel?
Well, I think that I think a lot changed in the vocal delivery. I learned more about myself and what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it, what kind of voice that I wanted to have, both literally and kind of conceptually.
With Goner and Ode to Sleep, we talked about these ideas that seem to be threads of what Blurryface would grow to be. As ideas developed, so would production, in both the musical sense and the onstage sense. And we can watch some of that happen.
My flow's not great, okay. I conversate with people who know if I flow on a song, I'll get no radio play. While you're doing fine, there's some people and I who have a really tough time getting through this life, so excuse us while we sing to the sky.
Yo, this song will never be on the radio. Even if my clique were to pick and the people were to vote, it's a few the proud and the emotional.
So these two verses are pretty similar. This one from Screen would have been written at the very latest in early 2012, which means so was the choice to use this deep pitch down voice. It says, my flow's not great, okay, I conversate with people who know if I flow on a song, I'll get no radio play. He says, maybe I'm not very good, alright, people tell me that if I make the kind of music that I make, I'm not getting on the radio. While you're doing fine, there's some people and I who have a really tough time getting through this life, so excuse us while we sing to the sky. There are some people like me who need the kind of music that I make, so excuse us if we keep doing it, even if it's fucking pointless. That's my angry spoken word edition. But there's some insecurity in here, there's some anger. Like, maybe I'm not very good. Maybe if I am just who I am, I'm not getting on the radio. But at the same time, I know that this matters. The sentiment, it's insecurity and resentment, but the delivery is like challenging. Like this is a badge of honor. So that's 2012. The record is released January 2013, after which they start writing material for the next album, Blurryface. So then we get here.
But really, he represents everything that I as an individual and I'm insecure about. And what's cool is I know that we all, as individuals, understand we're insecure about certain things. But where our self-awareness starts to dissolve is when we start to try to understand how those insecurities affect us every day. How do we compensate for it?
So what if we think of Blurryface as, in some instances, the voice of compensation? Who, of course, sounds like this.
One of the ways that he himself manifests in the record is kind of that pitch down vocal effect.
So when this verse is delivered, we know that it's a conscious choice that Blurryface is speaking. This song will never be on the radio. Even if my clique were to pick and the people were to vote, it's the few, the proud, and the emotional. So that hasn't changed in 3 years. It's like, my shit's not going to be on the radio. Even if we were given a say in this, we're still all we have. So that's the complaint, that's the resentment, the insecurity. But then we get, yo, you, bulletproof, in black like a funeral. The world around us is burned of ore so cold. It's the few, the proud, and the emotional. To me, this reads like mockery. Like, hey, tough guy, all dressed in black, you're just so unaffected. Too cool to want to fit in. Actually, that makes me think of an earlier line from Screen, standing in front of you, trying to be so cool. Like, remember this?
We don't think that we're very, very cool. You know, even though he's got red hair, which is freaking cool. But we're real about it. And I know I'm standing here in all black with a ukulele in my hand. Most musicians and performers live outside of themselves, and they don't realize the things that they're doing.
It's ambiguous, but I think we can safely assume that anything Blurryface is saying is not praise, or at least not the kind of praise we want. And in the second verse of Fairly Local, we have good guy Tyler talking about being emotional like it's something to be mitigated, not celebrated.
I'm evil to the core. What I shouldn't do, I will. They say I'm emotional. What I wanna save, I'll kill. I'm not evil to the core. What I shouldn't do, I will fight. I know I'm emotional. What I wanna save, I will try.
So yeah, Blurryface saying
It's a few the proud and the emotional.
it's maybe not something we want to strive for. Or maybe it is. Maybe that's super wrong. Maybe it's positive. But the point is, putting the radio thing in the deep voice, again, while consciously knowing what that voice is being used for, that's development. That's acknowledging it as an insecurity. Let's talk about another type of production that we can see developed. This is Screen in early 2014, and we have the deep voice there, but we haven't quite settled on red light as a way to represent it. So here, it's voiced with blue. But as Tyler gets to know the character of Blurryface, the more he realizes that blue has nothing to do with him, but red does. So this is still 2014, but they're gonna take out the blue light and try out just darkness. So at the same time as they're toying with how to visually represent this voice, they'll also start to mess with the color red, starting with migraine. And we're used to that, having a flash of red on the words depressing thoughts. And it's not like they flip a switch, they mess with it for a little bit. And of course, as we in the future know, when 2015 rolls around in the new touring cycle, this is the version they land on. For these songs that didn't initially have red light, it's almost as though he's going back over them with a red highlighter, showing where Blurryface had already been. Anyway, I just wanted to emphasize that rather than like cryptic hints squirreled away in the past, I think the threads of Blurryface are something that we watched grow. And that's a useful lens for looking at the songs that Blurryface seems to be present in as they're presented to us in the Blurryface and Trench eras. Not to say that there weren't cryptic hints, like this almost completely arbitrary seeming blurring of faces in the Otis Sleep video, which was released December 31st, 2014, by which time they definitely knew what the album was called and what a lot of their theming would be. And you know what? Distorted faces would be part of the Blurryface imagery, and I am getting completely off track. So on to Holding On To You. When I think of the question, what colors was Holding On To You before the Blurryface era, the first thing I think of is like a bone-deep weariness. Like, for sure, it was red and blue. You could see that in a little montage. But also, sometimes, everything else. Sometimes you'll see some purple, which does show up a lot of places. Red shows up pretty much for all time, but also maybe some orange, occasionally yellow. Here's some green, who knows? The benefit of research though is that I can hit Control F, red, and see that it does show up the majority of the time, mostly with blue. Although when we cross into the blurry face era, that blue is mostly going to fall away, at least bright blue, and it'll stay mostly just red and white, though the pale purple sticks around too. And I think it's worth whipping this quote back out about dropping blue because it has nothing to do with blurry face, because we can see on this mid-2014 set list that we have, our little Bible, that it says holding on to you, NC-red, and there's like a 900% chance that NC means no color, because every time we see Tyler do the crowd stand, there's no color. And many of the rest of these are consistent with what we know now too. Guns for hands, cyan and red, car radio, blue on blue, trees, green and white. So the question is holding on to you one of those ideas that would grow into blurry face? Well, for one thing, among Tyler Joseph's many skills and hobbies is not talking about the content of this song.
The second song is a song called Holding On To You, and that was our first selection for a single, they call it. And lyrically is a whole other conversation. It's deeper than I even really know how to get into. The song Holding On To You really is a moment inside of my mind as a writer when it comes to the lyrics. I'm not trying to rap to be a rapper at all. I don't know if you can notice, but I'm not really a rapping type guy. But honestly, the art of rapping was the most effective way for me to say all the words that I had, and the only way you can say everything you want to say is saying it really fast, and people think that's rap, I guess.
Like, he gives every impression of telling you something, but he's not. Anyway, when we look at the content at hand, we have music video, stage production. And one thing that the stage production does is call back to the music video. Even here, we have so many interconnected visual themes, like this skeletal dancer, or this business. A lot of people attribute these to the notion of a cycle, and I support that. That's what it looks like to me, and it's not too hard to connect the idea of a circle to a cycle, which is similar to these, which we saw in Goner. These ones to me look kind of like a ticking clock, but what does a clock do but narrate a cycle? Now, some people think this song is a kind of recommitment to God, and it might be. About 50% of the time, when he's saying, I'll be holding on to you, he's looking upward, and the other half, he's squeezing his eyes shut. So he says, taking over my body, back in control, no more shoddy. So he's been a passenger in his own life, or you might even say, his own vessel. I bet a lot of me was lost, T's uncrossed and I's undotted. This has cost him something. He feels that he has not had his shit together. I fought it a lot, and it seems a lot like flesh is all I got. Not anymore. Flesh out the door. Sweat. So let's talk about this use of the word flesh.
My version of success in my flesh, where it's just my humanly instincts, I think, well, if I can influence and impact this many people, I'd be successful. But maybe my view of success is so messed up that really the most successful thing is that one person that I'm gonna impact my entire life.
When he says flesh and humanly, I get this vibe. Worldly. He's rejecting this being ruled by flesh that's left him a passenger in his own life. And conceptually, this is not too far from the idea of blurry face, a part of yourself that's constantly undermining you. And while Tyler may be holding on to God, in this video, something is for sure holding on to Tyler, in a couple different ways. Like, super literally. And look, man, I don't know if this is supposed to be sinister as fuck, but it super is. Like, I think that's my sleep paralysis demon. But I think if there's one thing to make the case for there being an element of blurry face here, it's this.
This record, this next record is called Blurry Face, and there's kind of this whole long description of who he is, but it's a character, and it's a guy that kind of represents all the things that I as an individual, but also everyone around me, are insecure about. You know, we're all insecure about certain things, and when I think about insecurities and my insecurities getting the best of me, the things that I think of are kind of a feeling of suffocation, and then also the things that I, create with my hands. I'm very insecure about what I create. So my hands and my neck for kind of representing who this blurry face character is in this record.
Neck, hands, suffocation. Where have we seen that? Everywhere. Now that is a really strong argument for some seed of blurry face being in Holding On To You. And also, wow, that's fucking sad. That hurts my heart. Alright, Holding On To You. Red and blue at least half of the time up until the blurry face era, and from the blurry face era onward, almost exclusively red and white. Tyler holding on to God, something else holding on to Tyler, and general scariness. Next up, Heavy Dirty Soul. Okay, so we know that Heavy Dirty Soul was of course written for blurry face. It's the first track. So of course it's going to be red and white. And there's some other colors snuck in there, but we can't do everything all at once. Now, one interesting thing about Heavy Dirty Soul is that the beginning of it is the end of Goner. Not Goner that's the end of the record, the original Goner. Here's the blurry face album version. And here's Old Goner, followed immediately by the beginning of Heavy Dirty Soul. Suggesting that the overall story here is not just about a cycle, but a cycle that evolves. In December 2015, 21 Pilots uploaded a live performance of Heavy Dirty Soul from Fox Theater. The next video they upload will be in April of 2016, also a performance of Heavy Dirty Soul, titled Circle. Now, Circle is unique in that it starts with a flashback of a chorus and Tyler falling. He does get back up, but like later, in some other room, and then he starts the cycle over. It's like an early analog of the music video itself. Now this should seem familiar. In both of these, we seem to be fading into the middle of a story, where Tyler gets up from the last time he fell. And of course he's gonna fall again, but it's almost as though we get, like, some warning. In Jumpsuit, Tyler's armband switches sides repeatedly, like something's not quite right here. And in the video titled Circle, we have Tyler very conspicuously shaking his hand instead of the tambourine. And as this quote from Daniel Schlesinger in PLSN in 2015 seems to suggest, this kind of stuff is very much on purpose. Particularly the line here that says, sometimes the goal is to see the outline of Tyler's body as he's jumping off his piano or swinging his LED microphone behind him as a backdrop. Point is, that's a super tactical lighting and filming choice. We're supposed to see this. One other thing that we're going to see in Heavy Dirty Soul as a sign of blurry face and his themes is visible conflict, like this example from the first version of Goner and this one from Ride. I don't know if you can tell slowed down, but he's like punching himself. And now, because I can, I'm gonna make you watch both uploads of the Heavy Dirty Soul live performances and the music video all at the same time. It'll be like quiet watching time, just like the first video. We're just here to observe and see what little similarities there might be. I like how when Tyler gets up, he's like slightly disoriented. Acting choices. I'm a little reluctant to comment on this, but I do notice how the one on the right is a little more red and purple, and the one on the left is a little more orange and white. Like maybe it doesn't mean anything, and I don't want to distract from the topic, which is red, but that's a thing. And the one on the left will get redder towards the end. And here we see these two different variations on this cycle. In one instance, Tyler's using the tambourine like you're supposed to, and the other, on the left, he's like clearly shaking and shit's just not going right. Now watch the way his head jerks back as if he's been hit. It even gets a sound effect. So Josh and his scary mask are showing us who the enemy is. With the red eyes and shit, he's being blurry face. Because remember, this is before the video came out. This is like late 2015, early 2016. In the video we have this black car with like the red markings and a dark hooded figure occasionally driving car with like the flickering, fluttering snow around his head so we know it's Blurryface. But on stage, all we have is Josh, Tyler, and lights and costume to make it clear what the dynamic is. And now that we have both, we can see them side by side and be like, look, this is the same guy. And obviously, I'm not saying in any real way that Josh is Blurryface. I'm saying he's usually in the role of demonstrating one half of that dynamic. And of course this moment, when we see the car door falls off, at the exact moment Tyler does his death drop, left screen Tyler will not get back up and the screen goes black. And look man, I'm not gonna pretend I know what the exact relationship between Tyler and the car is supposed to be, but I feel like what's happening here is some hits you get back up from, some you just start over. Look how Tyler prompts the audience as though they're helping him stand back up. He lets the audience do this for him. One of his lean on my pride moments, huh? These videos make me excited to exist. Okay, so we see tons of examples of this cycle, starting, beginning, night and day thing all over the place. Sometimes being a literal cycle, like Heavy Dirty Soul, but other times representing extremes of circumstance or perspective. And of course, at the end of Leave the City, we see, at the edge of Trench, a rising sun.
But this year, though I'm far from home, in
And Vessel is just like a whole ass manifesto on the same set of ideas. Especially this one, which continues, fight it, take the pain, ignite it. We should do a whole video on fire as a symbol. Heavy Dirty Soul also calls back to Ode to Sleep, referencing the sinister and destructive voices in his head. I swear I heard demons yelling, plus there's an infestation in my mind's imagination. As well as using the song as a weapon. Some see a pen, I see a harpoon, and just another attempt to make the voices stop. So, Heavy Dirty Soul, definitely red and white, among potentially other things. Self versus self. An ongoing cycle with iterations that have different outcomes. Next up, Guns for Hands. So, Lighting for Guns for Hands, prior to the Blurryface era, is probably about what you expect at this point. Not a lot of sample data for 2012, but some instances that might be red and blue, most of the time for 2013, and really consistent by 2014. If you're wondering why so many of these say cyan, that's because it is different from blue, and this specifically says cyan. I feel like, and this is like a pedantic thing, most of the branding for the Best era was specifically cyan, not blue. And though they did use blue in some places, the intentional choice of using cyan is very much a thing. Like, red and cyan are that era. And to me that makes sense stylistically because cyan is the opposite of red, and there's this whole, like, duality, opposites thing going on. And before you send me messages about how green is the opposite of red, that's only for paint. When it comes to ink or light, like you might see on clothing or anything printed or a screen of any kind, the opposite of red is cyan. Not that they adhere to it religiously, I think about it sometimes. Just saying. So here in these examples from 2014 to 2017, we can see cyan and blue, and it can be really hard to distinguish. I don't think it really matters that much, and red. And the visuals will be a callback to the music video, pretty much just like a colorized version of the music video. And the visuals too are in the colors of that era for the most part. Now we know that blue has nothing to do with Blurryface, and yet this song is still red the whole time. So what does that mean, the presence of both things? Tyler does experience a struggle here, but it's not one born of his own human failing or a challenging circumstance, it's empathy for other people. So I don't think this is Blurryface. Which brings me to this. Our old friend Lighting in Sound America, January 2019. Let's continue with the quote we started in the first video. Stressed Out is a Blurryface song that is red and white. Bandito is yellow and green. Certain songs don't fit the paradigm. Car radio will always be blue, which doesn't mean anything to our branding. Trees will always be green. In this story, Trees is green and yellow because that is the last song and the resolve. So this tells us a bunch of different things in this story. Like, lighting is contextual. Certain songs don't fit the paradigm. Not everything is going to be part of a pattern. And some things will stay what they have always been. And I think that's the case here. Guns for Hands is a moment in time. And it makes me think of this.
Yeah, I think it's we never wanted to turn our back on like old records. Obviously, those are very important to us. Things that still mean a lot to us today. But obviously, the latest thing that you've released is the most important to you at that moment because it kind of is a snapshot of who you are.
But at the same time, I think that a record will always be a snapshot in time representing who we are in that moment.
Using the Vessel color scheme and the music video, I think this is one of those things that is as it is because it has always been.
Together, let's breathe together to the beat.
That being said, there does exist a 2012 version of Guns for Hands that uses an early version of the deep voice. So, make of that what you will. So, Guns for Hands. Red, Blue, and Cyan. More about empathy than duality, and a throwback to Vessel. And that's just about that on that. Next up and last up, Stressed Out. So let's look back at this. Stressed Out is a Blurryface song, so that is Red and White. That's interesting, cause even during the Blurryface era, it wasn't Red and White. It has its red highlighted verse, like a lot of things do, like we covered in the last video. In fact, Stressed Out has the distinction of being the only song that gains rather than loses red from Blurryface era to Trench. I think that Stressed Out is doing during this Trench album cycle what Guns for Hands did in Blurryface, become emblematic of an era. Partly because it'll go from being purple, yellow, green to wholly red and white and showing all of the patterns of all the songs from Blurryface, but much more than that, this. That's almost a full minute long. That's a really long time for something to be happening on stage that isn't music. Something is being said here. And as we know, Stressed Out was a big deal for them. Like a really big deal. Like, I'm not great at math, but that's a lot of yellow. And I wasn't in the fandom at the time, but you can look back and still see that they just exploded. Like, their production budget, for one, clearly at least tripled, as did the resolution of these massive screens that they carted all around the world. Their tours went from clubs and theaters to arenas, all sold out. Suddenly they were on magazine covers everywhere. It was their first top 10 Billboard hit. And while this brought them a shitload of new fans, it also brought them a lot of scorn from some of the old ones, and some critics as well.
Wish I wrote a different song no one's ever heard. I wish my mom would just admit she's sick of every word. Overplayed, overstated was a smash hit. Funny how overplayed songs sound like crap. I was talking to fans, don't like the song, but I hope they sing along. I hope they sing along.
And I don't know, when this was the first tour that we did where almost every song that we started playing, the crowd was just like really excited for whichever reason, except for Stressed Out. Every time we played that live, for me it felt like everyone was kind of like felt like they weren't allowed to get excited for it or something. Like there's this like inner layer of fans that come to shows that kind of feel like we've been exposed to the outside world, and I don't know, for me that kind of broke my heart because I love that song so much. I shouldn't be ashamed of how that song is kind of like taken off and really done us
an amazing service of just getting in front of people. When Josh and I first started talking, we just wanted as many people to hear our music as possible, and in order to do that, you have to have a song that kind of like takes off, and I'm glad it was Stressed Out now, so I feel good about it.
Which brings me to these. The hat is lowered into the arena after the end of a bumper video, like one of these, which is used before a song to contextualize it or tell a story. This is the one that they chose for Stressed Out. So for several months, I was like, I don't understand that at all. That's cool. But then, a friend linked the original song on Twitter, and then I was like, oh shit. Watch this red little skateboard move of its own accord between all these people who choose to try and use it, and listen to the words.
Trials and tribulations. Refinement from cultivation takes patience. I'm waiting. Paper chasing to get a place like Peyton. Politicking, interfacing, business relations. Built the empire from the underground, then retire. Who said I was on crack? You the motherfucking liar. See me in the trench coat, but missed the joke. So fuck the host. My mission is this: get in position to assist my foes. Get in position to assist my mother, my mother, and my auntie, and my uncle, my folks. You know?
This song is about a come up. Like, this is about fucking working hard, building what you have, and succeeding, and not apologizing for that. It's a great song, it's a great video, super recommend it. And I think it's really cool that the bumper video plays off that, and it makes me wonder what older videos might have been referencing, if anything. So anyway, where does this take the little red hat? Well, in the words of Fat Lip, refinement from cultivation takes patience, and where that brings him is right here, to a sold out arena. This little stressed out hat gets a good 40 seconds of pride of place in 2 spotlights before being greeted.
There's my little guy. There's my little guy. Here's my little guy.
And as far as this goes, well, we do end up seeing a lot of this.
Wish you found some better sounds no one's ever heard. I was told when I get older, all my fears would shrink, but now I'm insecure, and I get what people. Wish you found some better sounds no one's ever heard. Sounds no one's ever heard. I was told when I get older, all my fears will shrink, but I'm insecure.
I saw it going around Twitter during the European tour. Like, Tyler keeps forgetting the lyrics to Stressed Out. No, dude, he didn't forget. He's like checking. Like, are you with me? Anyway, what I'm saying is you don't spend 2 minutes on a video about this hat, and then a minute of this hat descending from the ceiling, and then greeting this hat, if this hat doesn't mean something, and then set all of that next to this. Earlier this year, in 2019, Brandon Reich's new website, Tension Division, launched. And on it, he had proofs of the album artwork, but some of the versions were not the versions that went to print. And he did take those down and switch them out, but not before we saved them. One of them says this, into Blurryface, for inspiring this retaliation, which would be replaced by this. And to our haters, you know you like Stressed Out. So yeah, it really seems like the whole ride that came with Stressed Out and Blurryface overall definitely made an impression, and that's part of what we're seeing here. Well, that's what I think anyway. That, taken with the lighting and the visuals, turning to the colors and the patterns of the whole Blurryface album, I think that Stressed Out is doing the thing where it represents an era. Instead of being part of the story the band is telling, it becomes part of the story of the band itself. And that's that on that for Stressed Out. This was 50 fucking minutes long. Damn. Next up, songs that use red in ways we have not yet discussed. And if we have time, songs whose use of red changes over time. And then maybe, we'll eventually get to other colors. And because of the enormity and length of time of this particular installment, I would be remiss if I didn't do some thanks.
Don't let me be!